Many people are uncomfortable with the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim. When I go to a Shiva house, what do I say? How do I say it? How should I conduct myself? And it becomes a burden and it becomes an issue that sometimes can stop a person from feeling comfortable, maybe even stop them from doing the mitzvah. So I'd like to share with you a perspective that I think helps us define what the actual mitzvah is, and when we understand it from the right perspective, it actually becomes a guiding light in terms of how to conduct himself, how I should act, what I should say. Let's begin with the following. The pasuk says, "V'ahavata l'reacha kamocha." Love your neighbor as yourself is a typical translation, and the Ramban on Chumash observes that can't possibly be pshat. It's impossible, says the Ramban, that the Torah would obligate me to love my friend as I do myself. Self-love is the strongest emotion in the human heart. My own self-preservation, my own interests are innately put into me, and I can't possibly love another human being as I do myself. But even more than that, Chayecha Kodman. Rabbi Kiva taught us that if you're on that desert island, there's one canteen of water, and it's you and your friend, you come first. So it says the Ramban, what is the pasuk saying? And the Ramban explained that if you read the pasuk very carefully, it's not saying love your friend as you do yourself. V'havata lire'echa, share love to him, feel love towards him as you do to yourself. Whatever good you want for yourself, whatever things that you're interested in, whatever is valuable to you, all the good that you want for yourself, you should want for him as well. And my Rabbi, the Shiva Zatzal, often would say over this Ramban that we are one unit. The Jewish nation is one unit, one body, and I'm supposed to look at my friend and say, what can I do to help him? If I eliminate the jealousy, if I eliminate the competition, if there are no distinctions between us, then obviously whatever I want for myself, I want for him. And more than anything, I'm with him. I'm with him in his joys. I'm with him in his sorrows. When it's his wedding, I go there with a tremendous joy, but not because I'm happy, but because I'm sharing in his joy. When he makes a bris for his son, I'm sharing in that emotion. I'm sharing in his ups. And as I share in his ups, I share in his downs as well. When he has bad news, if he loses a job, if he loses a business, I'm with him. I feel his pain. And certainly when it comes to a loss of a loved one, I feel his pain. I'm with him. We're one unit. And I believe while this is the definition of the Ahavata L'Reacha Kamocha, I think it's also the underlying principle that guides us in Nichum Avelim. What is my role? I'm going to visit. What am I going to do? I'm going to share his pain with him. I'm not going there to lecture. I'm not going there to be philosophical. I'm going there to be with him in his pain, to share his loss, to join with him. And that emotion is the underlying principle and the guiding light in terms of what I should do, how I should conduct myself, how I should act. I'm going there for one purpose, to share his loss, share his pain. And if you think in those terms, I think the mitzvah becomes very clear and becomes very well defined. Obviously, you have to think before you go in, who am I visiting? If it's a 92-year-old woman who passed away after a full, beautiful life, it's a very different Shiva house than if it's a 6-year-old girl who got hit by a car. So before you go in, you have to put into your mind's eye what it is likely that they are going through. And when I enter that door, it's with one intention. I'm here to share that person's loss. I'm here to be one with them. I'm here to share their burden. And if you walk in with that thought process, it will guide you through everything. You also have to be flexible because not every person reacts the same way to a loss. Different people have different backgrounds, different experiences. I once went to the Shiva house of an Adam Gadol, and I experienced a very divergent scene. First, the men were sitting in one area of the house, the women were sitting in another. I visited the men's section first, and there were the sons. And they were discussing their father. Their father was a very accomplished person. He was a posek, machaber svarim. He was a person of tremendous accomplishments. And while the mood was somber, there was a real sense of sharing who their father was, a sense of pride. It was a very interesting experience. But then I went over to the women's section, and the wife was sitting Shiva. But that was a Shiva house, because that was a loss. and that was a woman bereft, a woman left without, and it was a very different emotionality and a very different experience. So obviously, I have to not just walk in being prepared, I also have to be flexible to react to who I'm going to be with. But again, my underlying thought process is I'm sharing with them. And I think if you walk in with that thought process, you know exactly what to say. Chazal defined what we should say. Basically, nothing. I'm not there to answer questions. I'm not there to philosophize. I'm not there for anything other than to share in this burden. And the reason why Chazal defined that the Ovel speaks first is part of this very concept. I walk in there and I don't speak. I walk in there and the floor is open to the Ovel. The person sitting Shiva will express what's on his mind, what he's thinking. My role is, if anything, to draw him out, to be a sounding board, to allow him to express. When he expresses who the person was, he accomplishes a tremendous thing. According to many Rishonim, the actual sitting Shiva is a kavod hames. When he sits on the floor and he says those words, he's showing kasha alai mesi. Look how severe my loss is. Do you understand who this person was? Do you understand what it is that we've lost? And the more he speaks about the person's accomplishments, what the person meant to everyone there, the more kavod hames it is, and certainly the more therapeutic. Because for a person to feel those emotions, be attuned to them, and be able to express them is a huge part of the consolement, of the bereavement process, and it's very, very therapeutic. My role is to be on the receiving end. My role is to listen. My role is to be there to share in his loss. And if you walk in with that perspective, and if you walk in with that understanding, you know very well what to say. All I'm interested in doing is feeling. All I'm interested in doing is sharing. And you'll ask questions. Oftentimes the questions may be, if the Ovel begins speaking, you ask sort of open-ended questions about what the person, who he was, what he accomplished, what he did. But I want to share with you one thing that many, many people make a mistake about. In this country, there is a disease called prattle. There seems to be some kind of need to fill space with sound, as if to say silence is an evil, and we have to constantly fill it with mindless chatter just going on. Now, if you feel that's appropriate, that's okay, but it doesn't belong in a Shiva house. Your job is not to fill the air with words. Your job is not to go on. Your job, if anything, is to coax the person to speak, to ask questions, if at all, to bring the person out. But your job is to have the person speak, because when you share in his pain, that is the greatest nechama. We human beings are social beings. We have families, we have communities, we have friends, and that gives us a tremendous sense of connection. When another person shares in my pain, when they join me in it, it lightens it, it makes it easier for me to bear the burden, and it just accomplishes exactly that which Chazal intended. It becomes a Nichum, a consolation. It makes it easier for that person. It consoles him. And this understanding is, I believe, the theme that underlies everything. And often it's not easy, because often there are people who speak different things at Shiva houses, sometimes even inappropriate. Now again, it's not my job to teach anyone, certainly not in a Shiva house, and certainly not the people who are sitting Shiva. And if they engage in frivolous conversations, it's not my point to correct them in any sense. I'm there to support, I'm there to feel the pain, and the more I feel that, likely it is that they'll come back to the issue at hand, which is the deceased, who he was, who she was, what the loss meant to them. And feeling that pain and engaging them in it is the key to allowing that process to begin, allowing that to happen. Sometimes it is that people ask philosophical questions. Sometimes people have questions on Hashem, questions on how it could be. And I'd like to share with you that your role as the Menachem is not to be a Musar teacher. Even if the answer is obvious, and even if they're making a mistake, your role is not to be there to teach people. I'll share with you a case in point. My mother, Aleh Shalom, had a close friend, They were very, very good friends for many years. My mother passed away, and a number of years after my mother passed away, this woman had a tragedy. Her son, at the age of 40, suddenly died. And it was a tremendous, tremendous loss. No one anticipated it. No one expected it. I didn't have the kind of relationship with this woman that normally I would go to the Shiva call, but I felt my mother would have been there, and I felt out of honor for my mother, I felt it appropriate for me to go. It was a long trip. I got in the car, and I arrived. I arrived midday, and when I walked into the house, there were quite a number of people sitting there, and this woman who's sitting Shiva looks up and says, "Oh, Barry's here. Barry's here. He'll answer the questions. Why? Why did it happen? How could Hashem let this happen?" Now, if you listen to the shmooze, you'll know that I don't shy away from philosophical questions. I'm not scared off by why these things happen. There's an entire shmooze, number 163, dedicated to that concept. Only the good die young. Why, in fact, people die at different ages. So I'm not afraid to deal with that issue, but this was not the time for it. And what I did when I walked in the door and she said those words, I walked over right to her, I sat down on a chair, and I said basically nothing. After a few minutes I said, my mother would have been here, I wanted to be here for her. And then I started thinking. I was older than this fellow who passed away, and I remember many years ago I was his babysitter one night, and I remember him, and I had that mental image of him as a little guy in a big bed, and I thought back on that, and I began crying and crying. I don't think I said much else. I got up, said Amokum Yinachem, I left. After the Shiva, this woman called my father and said she had tremendous nechama, tremendous consolation from the words that I had said. What did I say? I didn't say anything. But I was there, feeling her pain and being with her. But here's the point. My job is not to answer why. My job is not to be the one who gives direction. My job is to feel her pain, to be with her, to be with a person in their joy, in their sorrow. That's a mitzvah saseh, that's Avdarecha Kamocha, and that's certainly Nichum Avelim. And it's something that requires reaching out, something that requires opening your heart. And it's something that requires an understanding of people. Sometimes people are extraordinarily insensitive, albeit not meaning to, but they are very, very cruel in their remarks. I'll share with you an example. A woman lost a child. The child had Down syndrome, and the child died very young. Another woman went to visit to Menachem Oval. This woman comes in, sits down next to the woman sitting Shiva, and says, "Oi, but you know what? It's better this way. It's better this way." I cannot describe the insensitivity of those words. If you feel that way, that's your opinion, but it's surely not the woman who's sitting Shiva's opinion. And if you share your version of life with her, don't do it now. It's a woman who's in pain. It's a woman whose life has been ripped apart. And your job is to be there with her, to do nothing other than to feel her pain, be there with her, offer the support by sharing her burden with her. And this mitzvah, done properly, is one of the most intuitive and also one of the most holy mitzvahs imaginable. Hashem is the ultimate meitiv. Hashem is the giver. Hashem is magnanimous and generous. We were put onto this planet to grow, to accomplish, to make ourselves domet Hashem. How do we make ourselves comparable, in some way similar to Hashem? Much as Hashem is rachum, much as Hashem is merciful, we make ourselves merciful. Much as Hashem is the giver, we try to make ourselves to be generous and magnanimous. When you go and share a person's pain, when you share their burden, you're acting, if it could be like Hashem on your level. You're helping that person, you're growing, you're doing the mitzvah properly. And it's a mitzvah that has tremendous, tremendous benefits for everyone involved. I want to close with one last point. Rabbi Levin, known as a tzaddik in our time, was a man of unimaginable compassion, a man with a heart that went out. And if you'd like to know how to fulfill the mitzvah of Nichum Avelim, of making a Shiva call properly, I'll share with you one story. A woman had lost a child, and Rabbi Ari Levine heard about it, and he went to be Menachem Aval. And he went to the house, he went to the door, and as he's about to open the door, he burst out in uncontrollable sobbing, tears and tears running down his cheeks, and he couldn't go in. He had to walk away, get himself together, and come back a second time, and then he walked in. And he walked in to sit with this woman, and to anyone there, it clearly was obvious that this woman was being menachem, was offering consolation to Rabbi Ari Levine, because he felt her pain, felt her loss to such an extent that if you were an observer, you would look at it as it was his loss, not her, and that ultimately is the way to Mekayim Nichum Avelim. I'm there to join this person, to offer but one thing, my heart, my feelings, I'm with you. If it were a joyous occasion, I'd be with you in that sense. Unfortunately, that's not the occasion. I'm with you in your pain. That's ultimately the defining essence of the mitzvah, and ultimately that guides us in how to perform it. May Hashem grant us that very shortly, Mavis should no longer be a part of our reality. May Hashem redeem us shortly.